Welcome to Heartland Darkland. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Cassie.
Hey, Dark
Hey
Heart.
there, cards. That's usually me, isn't it?
Hey, did you like my hey?
Yep.
Waiting for you to
No.
jump on board? No?
Mhm.
Okay. It's fine.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's been
you
a
were
long
good.
day.
Yeah, we're
Listen,
recording at
y'all.
night
Yep.
and
I've worked a
it's like
full
bedtime.
day. Like I've had so many clients today. It's
Yeah,
such a long day.
it's a Monday. It's been a long day. I hear ya. And I was like, oh, but at least this is like fun stuff. I mean, I
Yeah,
hate
it
saying
is.
like murder's so fun, but I
Right. But I
mean,
mean,
yeah, it
it's,
is.
it's
It's spooky
something.
season, and can you see
Yeah.
my some of my garb in the background? This is like the wall that I have the least on, so it looks lame. I should have flipped it
I have
because my house is decked out, but
I have nothing, but do you like my disapproving uterus behind me?
I do. I enjoy that, and I enjoy the books. You got a lot of everything there. I got nothing to look at except the one thing that I was like, I don't have anything on this wall of me. So
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
we're back. Thanks, guys. Thanks for letting us take a week off last week. We've been working on some fun stuff, which I guess we can kind of share now a little bit about today as far as the case, why we're doing this case. So there's going to be 2 episodes today. If you're listening right now, there will be a bonus episode after this, correct? Isn't that right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, the bonus
Okay. I was like,
episode will be
right? We
posted
decided?
after
Okay.
this. And so if you don't want any little spoilers for this case, if you're not familiar with this case or like super in depth with this case, definitely listen to this before you listen to the bonus because
Yeah.
there are some spoilers there.
Yeah, so we're kind of making a little exception today for multiple reasons, but we don't need to get into that right now. But if you have not heard of the infamous case of Lizzie Borden, today we're bringing that to you. And we know it's not in the Heartland, but it's spooky season and like most people know of the case or have at least probably heard of the name, let's say. So
Exactly.
yeah, so we have some fun stuff coming up kind of on that bonus episode. So we figured we would just go ahead and do that as the
This,
case for
yeah,
today.
this ties into our bonus
Yeah.
episode, but also, as we say all the time, this is our podcast and we'll do what we want.
Yeah.
Our main focus is obviously the Heartland, but sometimes we track out.
Yeah. You know what? And sometimes it's just like fun because quite honestly, the Lizzie Borden case I knew about and I knew the main, you know, facts of it, I guess I could say, but I didn't know a lot of the like little details. So it was kind of fun to go down that rabbit hole and find all the things that I did not know about the case. So
Yeah.
that being said, we are in Fall River, Massachusetts, and I was actually going to tell you ahead of time if you wanted to do a fun little nursery rhyme with me at the beginning, Cassie. We
I
sure
am
can if it's in sync.
I never remember how it starts, but
Would
I
you like me to
know,
start it out?
yeah. Yeah.
Lizzie Borden took an axe
And
and
gave her
gave
father,
her mother
oh,
first
was it her
nut.
mother? Okay, it's
She
mother
gave her
first.
mother
Or
40
40
whacks.
whacks. And when
When she
she
saw
saw
what
what she
she
had
had done,
done,
she
she gave
gave
her
her
father
father
41.
41. Boom. So if anyone has heard that little rhyme, we're
Except it
just
wasn't even
gonna,
actually her mother, it was her stepmom, right?
and the numbers are off and
Like a
it's a whole
lot.
thing. But
Yeah.
I just
But
thought, I was like, we're just gonna start with that because
but I
everybody's
feel
like
like,
heard that, right? Maybe.
right, like I heard that as a young
Oh
child.
yeah. I didn't think anything of it. Like, oh, okay. Like, I mean, I should have known deep down that there was probably some dark part of me that liked that
I mean,
because
the
of
whole thing, I mean,
foreshadowing.
yeah, it's a
you
pretty
know.
dark rhyme.
Yeah, it
It is
sure is. And it really
telling.
doesn't hide the fact that she took an axe. Like, it's
Yeah.
not even sugarcoating that.
No, no, it's
So,
not. Children should not have been,
I mean, right.
yeah.
So, that being said, this case is old school, but I think, like we said, most people know that. I mean, there's even a freaking nursery rhyme about it. So, yeah. Um, Clearly there's a ton of resources. I read so many different things. There's so many different things you can watch. Um, I mean, we can put some in the show notes. I don't even know if it's necessary at this point because I feel like you Google her name and 100 things pop up. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
I did watch today because I had some extra time. I watched the movie Just Lizzie, which came out in 2018, and it has Kristen Stewart in it and Chloe. I do not know how to say her last name with an S. She's in tons of stuff. I really don't want to butcher her last name, but you would know her. Look her up. You'll
I
know her.
feel like I vaguely remember this movie coming
It
out.
kind of it focuses on some themes that I didn't read a lot about anywhere else. So I think some of it is obviously fictionalized, which yeah, it's 1892 when this happened. So it's not like there's anyone still living from it could,
Right.
confirm or
Yeah.
deny. It was interesting just because, seeing how the creator of that portrayed the murders and how they took place, which I'll talk a little bit maybe about that as I'm talking about different things, but really that's more of just kind of like an entertainment purpose type thing. So,
Yeah.
um, but I did watch that. It's on Peacock. So if anyone wants to
Okay.
watch that one, it was fine. It was interesting. So,
Oh,
um,
it was Chloe,
I don't know how to say her last name.
Sevigny,
Yeah.
but she
She's
was
in
in
tons of stuff.
well, and she was in Boys Don't Cry as
Oh, she was.
well,
I forgot.
which
I just watched her in Monsters. She plays Kitty Menendez, the mom. She was just in that
oh
one.
gosh,
And I
yeah.
saw her, let's see, she's in American Horror Stories and like tons of stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, okay.
Yeah.
So, anyway, back to the story here. So, as you all know, it's kind of a spoiler alert. Yes, we're going to be talking about murders. And yes, this is heavily focused on Lizzie. And we'll tell you why, but just so you're coming into it knowing that much. So, um, I will refer to her as Lizzie, but I will mention that later, after the fact of after the murders and all the things, she did change her name to just Lizbeth. And she wanted to
Oh.
be referred to as that, which I don't blame her after all the things and notoriety that came with that. But that is actually what's on her headstone today. It says
Oh,
Lizbeth.
okay.
So just a little fun FYI for you. But
Okay.
so Lizbeth, um, Andrew Borden was born on July 19th of 1860 in Fall River, Massachusetts. So, and like you mentioned before, in reference to the rhyme where she gave her mother 40 whacks, Abby Borden was actually not her mom. So, um, her name was Sarah, and her father was Andrew Jackson Borden. And Lizzie had one sister who was older than her by, I think, 9 years, and her name was, oh, sorry. I scrolled down too much on my notes here. Okay. Her name was Emma Lenora Borden. So after Sarah had Lizzie, it was about 2 years later, and she died. So in 1862, Sarah, their mother, died. Lizzie was 2, Emma was 12, and Andrew actually just remarried only after a couple of years. So this is when he gets married to Abby Durfree Gray, who obviously became Abby Borden. So, I mean, she pretty much raised the girls
Yeah.
because that's really the only mom that like Lizzie
Lizzie
remembers.
remembered. Yeah.
So that's when they talk about her mother getting killed, that's who they're actually talking about, just because a lot of people get confused with that. But
Well, and that makes sense. I guess I couldn't remember at what point she had come into their life and stuff, so that's why I was
yeah,
like, I didn't think I was like stepmom, but no, at that point you would still
for her,
Lizzie
yeah.
probably called her mom
And we'll
even.
talk about that too,
Okay.
because she does. She calls her mom early on. We'll get there, but yeah. So at the time of these murders, Lizzie was actually 32 and her sister was 42. So I think that's another kind of thing. I did not realize that she was that old. I thought she was a lot younger than that when this happened.
I
So
think everyone thinks she was a teenager.
yeah, because that's like what I always feel like I was told or read or just
Well, it just
assumed.
yeah, just the way
Well, because
it
she's like living at home, and so you just kind of think that that's maybe.
but I mean that's a spinster at that
Oh
time.
man, yeah, totally spinster. I even have that in my notes. So yeah, look at all the things. So at the time of their murders though, Abby was 65 and Andrew was 70. So just kind of wanted to mention that too. So in Fall River, the Borden name very well known. Their family was very well off. So Andrew was a real estate developer and he was very successful with that. So he also was like, I don't know, he was a manufacturer, investor, all the business things. He was just really good. That was his thing. Um, they also said he was from one of the founding fathers who was descent from them. So, okay, in Fall
Oh,
River, I'm sure it's real
yeah.
high and mighty there, but I don't know who would be from Fall River. It just sounds like a
I,
place I should say. But so he was just, I mean, he was known for having money, but he was actually known kind of for being just like a total like cheapskate. I can say that because he's dead, but like very
That was also
frugal.
so long ago, but also, like, I feel like
Yeah.
that's such a, like, you see that so often
Uh-huh.
and people, which I get, like, a lot of people, I mean, some people are born into their money and stuff or whatever, but a lot of
Right.
people, it's like, if they have money like that, it's like they didn't get that by spending a lot, but also, like,
Exactly.
you get to a
Exactly.
point too where sometimes you're like, "Okay, you've got the money, like, loosen up a little bit."
Correct. So he was not one of those. So like when he actually first started working, he was actually working as an undertaker, and it is rumored that he would actually cut off people's feet to fit them in smaller coffins so he could cut costs. So like
Ew!
that's taking it to the extreme,
Oh, that's
right?
too
Yeah.
far.
So even though he was loaded, he was not like, I mean,
Also,
he
like,
was, but frugal AF. But
cutting costs, like, just you put that into what the family pays
right.
you.
Yeah, so he was, like, just known for cutting corners, so he wasn't really, like, a popular guy. Um, he yeah, he was just known to have a lot of money, but he was kind of a dick, you know? That's kind of the vibe
Yeah,
I get, like, just not
yeah,
a big nobody was a big fan of him, but
yeah.
he was worth millions, so nobody messed with him, and, um, that was kinda his gig there. So, at the time of the murders, there was actually, a live-in servant too that lived in the house with them. So, 26-year-old, Bridget Sullivan, she was Irish, and she actually lived and worked there for 3 years in their home. So, everyone knows back then they usually had some kind of servant or maid, whatever they wanted to call them. So, she was also in their house at the time. So, um, Lizzie and Emma, they had a previous maid that had lived there named Maggie. And when Bridget started working here, they decided that they were just going to refer to Bridget as Maggie because it was easier. And they expected her to just respond as Maggie, the old previous maid, even though her name was Bridget. So that also kind of tells you a little bit about Lizzie was kind of
Well, we also
yeah,
learned in our bonus episode that in the time, Irish immigrants were often not treated well. They were looked down upon, and they did, I guess, call a lot of Irish women, they just called them Maggie. I don't understand that
I don't
fully,
either.
but
I know. So they were
this
just
was
like,
definitely a "we're better than
yeah.
you."
Well, and it's funny because when I watched the movie today too, when Kristen Stewart is who plays Bridget, the servant, and when they're hiring her and she comes in, they say, but you will answer to Maggie. What? So, okay. So it's, I mean, sign of the times, but also you can tell they're
Yeah.
very entitled. So, um, yeah. So obviously they have money, especially if they have a servant. So Andrew didn't like to spend money. We know this. So he kept a very nice home. It was modest. This home was on 92nd or 90. Okay, the address was 92 Second Street.
Oh.
It has now changed based on the amount of houses and all that. It's still on Second Street. I didn't put what the new, I think it's like 230 or something, but that was the address of this home. He was so tight with money that they didn't even have electricity or a bathroom or running water in the home, even though this was a thing at this time, because he didn't want to spend money on that.
Oh
So,
god.
like, and he had the resources to do it, but he just didn't want to.
Well, and I suppose too, if he grew up without it, he'd be like, "I didn't have it in my day. Why do you
I
guys
know.
need it now? You're so pampered these days."
Yeah, he just sounds like a total dick. So, like,
Right.
yeah. I will add that now the house does have electricity and plumbing, and we'll talk about that because it is still standing, and we'll talk
I
about all the things you
I
can do with that.
assume it I was gonna say, I assume it's a thing where you can pay to stay the night, like the Velisca house
Mhm.
and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and like, I mean, sometimes those places don't necessarily like to do that because they want to keep it as like, real
Historically
and
accurate,
yeah,
yeah.
which whatever, but like, come on. So Lizzie and Emma were pissed off that their dad had all this money and refused to use it. Like they're kind of entitled, which like, I mean, let's be honest, if you have that kind of money and you have a servant. So
Right.
they're pissed off. They're like, you know what? Like, we have all this money. Why are we living like this when other people are living better? So Lizzie was always obsessed with this area in Fall River called, I don't know why I have to say it like that. It just feels like it's not even a southern state.
I was
But
there
okay.
trying to
So up on the hill, this was the area like where the upper class, they lived up there. All the parties were up there, the socialites, all the things. So Lizzie always wanted to live up there. She was really mad that they never moved up there. And their house was down in like the downtown area because it was close to all of Andrew's businesses and he wanted to be able to just like go check on things, which makes sense. Like I get
Yeah.
it. But,
I
when
mean, at least give your family electricity and running water
no
then.
shit, come on. Which, and they still live there. So like at the time of the murders, I guess we'll talk about this too, but since I'm kind of just thinking about it now, it's Lizzie and her sister Abby, Bridget, and then, or not Abby, sorry, Abby, Emma's the sister, Abby's the wife, the stepmom, and then Andrew. So they're older, but they're living there because it was kind of frowned upon to like go live on your own at that age as
Right.
a
If you're
female if
not
you weren't
married,
married.
yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so kind of back to the Abby thing too. So when she, got married to their father, the relationship started out okay. They did refer to her as mother and mom. They always called her that. Um, but as they got older, they kind of started thinking that maybe Abby was just married to Andrew for the money. And they thought that like her family might step in and try to inherit the money before they would. So this kind of sets off, some events. This whole thing kind of got started because at one point, Abby's half sister had apparently fallen into hard times, and Andrew decided to give her a rental property and to help out with money. So he gave her this property, and naturally, Lizzie and Emma are pissed. They're like, if you're going to give her something, what are you going to give us? So,
Right.
which understandable, but like, don't be, I mean,
I
come
mean, but
on. Like, when they say
also,
this, I'm like,
like,
you guys sound like spoiled brats. Like,
she was on hard times.
yeah. And I don't know, yeah, the extent of what it was, but I'm like, if he had it, and like, who knows? Maybe it wasn't even worth that much money, you know?
And I mean,
I don't
the
know.
thing that's so hard with cases like this, though, too, is that, like, we're hearing all this,
Yes.
and it's coming from a lens of a time where it would have been from men
Oh, yeah.
who think lesser of women, anyways. Like, you
Right.
can't live on your own without a man. And so, you kind of have to wonder and take some things with a grain of salt a little
Totally.
bit.
I was just talking about this with someone saying how it's funny that this case is as old as it is, and we have so much more information about this case than a lot of the newer cases, which blows my
Yeah.
mind. It's because it's a crazy case, but like also you have to think this has been over 100 years, so it's like so much could have changed and like
Yeah.
things spiraled. So like take it all with a grain of salt. This is just what I found, and I'm sure that there's lots of different accounts of what happened because even some of the things I read somewhere, it was a little different somewhere else, you know? So it's kind of
Right.
like, I mean, if we really wanted to go down that road, we could make a whole just series of this, but
Right.
we're not going to do that. So this is what you get. But they were mad about that. So Andrew apparently at some point decides to give them a rental property too because they're whining about it. So funny enough, after a while, all the money that they were making from this rental property, it went right back into the house because of repairs and just, all the things that comes along with that. Like it's not just going to be, you know, a mine right there. Like,
Right.
yeah. So they were mad about that. So they decided they just didn't want it anymore. So they wanted him to buy it back from them. And he did, probably just because he didn't want to deal with it anymore. So he bought it for twice as much as of what it was worth. So he bought it from them for $5,000 and it was only worth $2,000.
Oh my God, could
So,
you
and that's a
imagine
lot
buying
back
a
then.
house for
I know. Oh,
$5,000?
yeah. And who knows like the quality? I mean, I don't know, but if it was like that rundown and stuff, I was like, well, who knows? But yeah. So it's kind of like one of those things, oh yeah, the grass is not always greener. They want these things and then they get it and it's like, oh, actually I don't want it. So
Yeah.
that was kind of around the time that things started going south with Abby. So this was when Lizzie starts referring to her just as Mrs. Borden. She was really
Oh,
cold to her, yeah, like savage after, it's like
this
your
woman
whole
raised
life.
you.
Uh,
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if it's just like she's mad at that. It's like, be mad at your dad. He's the one that gave the property to her sister, like, I don't
Yeah.
know. And if
That's
she was
tricky.
there for the
Yeah.
money, she would have killed him by now. Like Abby could have killed him off and got his money, right? So like
Right.
I don't get it. But
Yeah.
yeah. So Lizzie was just really open about her hatred of Abby now moving forward. So even later when the police arrive to investigate these murders, which we're of course getting to, when the police referred to her as their mother, Lizzie straight up said, "She is not my mother." So in that situation, maybe like don't just hand them a motive. I don't know. It's kind of my
Yeah.
thought process. Like, yeah. So she was quick to make sure nobody called her their mom. So, um, but back before the murders, both Lizzie and Emma had kind of given up hope on getting married, which is kind of sad. Like, you guys are still young. Like, don't just give up hope. But at the
I
same
mean,
time,
in
like, just live your
1800,
life, you
like,
know? Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. They all died earlier, it seems like back then. But so, yeah, they were really considered spinsters at the time. So, which was basically age 30 and up back then, I think, is safe
I'm
to
surprised.
say.
I feel like it's like 22 at that
I
point.
know.
Like they
That's
were
true. It
marrying
was
them
probably
off.
lower
Like,
than that, but, you
but
know,
I'm also surprised with the fact that they do come from such
I
money that
know.
I feel like that's more telling about their father and the family
Yes.
itself than anything else. Like people didn't even want to, like, they're like, the money's not even worth it.
I know. They're like, "No way. Nope, not dealing with that." So, I know. I thought that was kinda interesting, like, the both of them weren't married. Like, I could
Yeah.
see maybe one, but, like,
Yeah.
what's the deal there? Why not, you know? And because I don't know the way their birthdays fall, but they were like they said they're, 9 years apart, even though everything shows 10 years, but I don't know, down to the birthdays. So, either way, I'm like, "Okay, so Emma was quite a bit older, so, like, I'm surprised that she didn't necessarily
Yeah.
find anyone, but, I mean, a little bit, more about Emma. She was kind of more of, like, the traditional spinster. She was really just, like, antisocial, um, just kind of very quiet to herself, didn't wanna do anything. So, I mean,
It
I guess
also
if you
makes
don't put
you
yourself out there, then
Yeah, but it also makes you wonder because, like, nowadays, like, did she have some sort of neurodivergence, that, like, at
right.
the time, they were just like, "Oh, she's standoffish," and,
Right. I know. Totally. And so, they said Lizzie was just quite the opposite of that. So Lizzie was involved in all the things. She was a member of the Center Congregational Church. She taught Sunday school. She volunteered. She cooked meals at the church for people. She was active in the Ladies' Fruit and Flower Mission
Oh.
and the Good Samaritan Hospital. Later on in her life too, she did continue to the very end to be very involved, and she would give tons of donations to charities. Um, she did it all anonymously, even beforehand, before the murders, she would do that. Afterwards, which I'm like, isn't that kind of why? I mean, isn't that the point of giving charity? Like, you don't do it
Ye
to get the
Well,
recognition anyway.
you're
You
not supposed
should,
to, I
but
mean,
yeah,
but that kind of feels like to me, like, if even prior to this, she was giving away money
right.
anonymously, it's like, so what would be the motive?
Motive. See, there's so many questions about this case because, I mean, we can discuss our theories and
Yeah.
whatnot later, but like, yeah, that right there shows that I mean, she had a good heart. Like, obviously something snapped. I mean, she'd probably never kill anybody, but still, like, yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting too. Um, but they said that she was wanting to settle down at some point. She had, expressed that. But there were also some rumors, which it's funny because I think sometimes people just want more of a scandal,
Right.
and there's all these theories about maybe she was a lesbian,
Oh, yeah.
and it's like, okay, yeah, of course that's fun to throw in there just to make it a spicier story from back
Right.
then. So there's like that kind of talk, and people think maybe she didn't settle down because she couldn't, because there's no way she could have been with a woman at the time, in society. So, um, like, who cares really? But I think that's more of just people wanting to kind of make it a bigger story than it
Right, to
was.
make it a little
So,
bit more salacious than it
yeah,
necessarily is,
totally.
because, like, the thing is, like, no, at that time she couldn't have been, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, though, a lot of women, men and women, still married
Right.
when they were not heterosexual,
Right.
and
There are ways
so
around things. I mean, and when you have the kind of money you have, like, I don't
you
know.
just have a good friend who lives with you too at that point, you
Yeah.
know? Like,
So the movie Lizzie even kind of alluded to the fact that her and Bridget had a relationship, and
Bridget, who she made go by Maggie.
correct. And I thought that's the stretch where I was like, I think this movie's like trying too hard to find some entertainment, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
just don't mind me with my blanket and pajamas here. But yeah, so just throwing that out there in case there's any truth to that. I don't know that necessarily had anything to do with why she was not. married or not. But okay, so let's go now closer to the murders. That's just kind of a little background on where they were at as far as just the setup of the whole situation. So on August 2nd, 1892, this was 2 days before the murders, the whole family got really sick. Well, except for Lizzie and Emma, which is a little ironic. So Emma was out of town, and Andrew and Abby thought they had been poisoned, which when I saw that, I was like, okay, that's an extreme conclusion to come to right away when you're sick. Like, but what was it in their mind that made them think that they were possibly
Right.
poisoned, right? Like, you would just
Yeah.
think, oh, we have a stomach bug or whatnot. So, like, it was kind of a weird jump there. So I figured, and of course, there's going to be things about their personal life that are never told about what kind of relationships they had with each other, they fought, whatnot. But like, um, that was one of the things, was that they thought they were poisoned. And I had read that they thought that the milk that they were getting delivered was poisoned. So they weren't sure if it was like an outsider or what. But after they're sick, Abby goes across the street and talks to this doctor that lived across the street from them. And she was telling him about it and asking him about it because they had been, like, I guess, super, super sick, like to the point where they could not eat, drink anything. And he was asking him questions about it, but he was like, this doesn't seem like anything poison related, because you probably would have just died instead of got sick like this. He straight up, this was kind of funny, but he was like, yeah, you need to like eat better food, because Andrew was such a cheapskate that like they were eating like spoiled food.
Oh.
Yeah, it was disgusting. I read, I don't know too. It said that they had like warmed salmon or something the night before. I was like, ooh. And it apparently was maybe not still
Well, then
good.
no
That'll do
shit.
it.
Yeah, especially if you're multiple nights in a row. Like, you're, oh, my stomach kind of hurts. Let's go ahead and continue to. Gonna eat some
Right.
moldy bread.
Right. So like this doctor was like, nah, dude, you need to just like eat better food. That's your problem right there.
That is an excessive amount of
No shit.
cheapskate to not
No.
even like, we're gonna
Like,
go ahead and eat spoiled food
that's
because
disgusting, because we don't want to
ew.
waste it. And yeah, I don't know. And I don't know if Bridget got sick. I think well, later on, there is talk of her not feeling well. So I don't know if she was eating the same food or not. But, and I don't know why Lizzie didn't get sick. That is a little sus, because I think she was there, but I don't know.
But
I don't
also
know what
maybe
she
she was
ate.
like, I'm not gonna eat the spoiled food. And if she's making
Correct.
food at church and stuff, she's probably
That's
just like, I'm
true.
gonna hoard some food for myself.
Right. Like, come on, man. So, the doctor sends old girl on her way. So the next day, which is August 3rd, Lizzie goes and visits her friend Alice Russell. So Alice will kind of come into play later on too. But this was Lizzie's like best friend. They were really close, which I don't really think Alice sounds probably like the bestest of friends, but because later on Alice does say at Lizzie's trial, during her testimony, that Lizzie had told her on August 3rd, that day that she had come over before the murders, that she just felt something bad was going to happen to the family. So she's kind of setting things up.
Yeah.
Right. So, like that alone is like, why even say that? I don't know. And maybe it's because it was her best friend that she thought she could trust her. I don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe, like, just don't. So she had said that the day before the murders to her friend. Um, Lizzie also had said that there had been a ton of like just burglary attempts on her house, and she felt like something was just hanging over her and their home, and she didn't know. She said that father just has so much trouble. I fear someone will do something. That was one of her quotes. So she's setting this whole thing up. I mean, we can assume.
Supposedly.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, this is also just like the secondhand
Story.
account,
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like,
So yeah, I had read the little quote of like several different places where she said, father has so much trouble. I fear someone will do something. So that part I believe she probably said, and maybe like because he does have lots of money and he is a
well,
cheapskate, like is he not paying employees?
right,
Is
that's
he,
just it though.
like
Like,
there
I
could have been.
it seems to me like that seems like a valid thing. He owns a lot
Agreed.
of businesses. If he has rental properties,
Yeah,
and he is this cheap. I mean, if he did legitimately cut people's feet off to fit into a thing and they find out later, I don't know how they
yeah.
find out, but like still, like,
No, that's kind of what I was like, how are we finding this out exactly? Are we
but like
digging up
also,
graves?
if a man is making his family eat spoiled food because he doesn't want to buy fresh food, this feels like a man who would find any excuse to not pay an employee for
Agreed.
something or to give them less than what was originally agreed upon.
Totally.
So it
That's
doesn't really
like, yeah,
seem that out of, like, it doesn't seem ominous to be like, I'm worried that something's gonna happen because yeah, your dad sounds
right.
like a
Total
piece of work.
douchebag. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, totally. And that's what I think a lot of the talk about how much people hated him. I'm like, I think that is actually a very valid point. And it is important to think, and also back in the 1800s, it's not like there was Nest cameras and there was all these things.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy. I mean, chances are like a lot of signs, I mean, point to her. It's just a lot of circumstantial things, though, So, yeah. So that was the day before the murder. So now on a Thursday morning, August 4th, this is when shit goes down. Um, so Sarah Borden's brother, so this was Lizzie and Emma's mother who passed away, her brother, so their maternal uncle, um, Uncle John. He had shown up for some business and he had come the day before on August 3rd. And so he had stayed overnight. I think he had stayed actually like a couple days. Um, and he actually did some business with their father, Andrew, which I had read somewhere as well that they possibly had an argument the night before about business stuff. Don't know if that's really relevant or not, but he had been there. So the day of, he went down, he had breakfast, and then he dipped out. So he had been there that day, but he was gone. So he was gone before Lizzie even saw him. Lizzie was kind of just having a lazy morning, I guess you could say, because she didn't come downstairs until like 9 a.m., which not like that's super late, but back
Right.
then it was. I mean, like they're probably up I don't know. Why do I feel like back then they got up early and like just worked their faces off from
I
sunrise
mean, I
to
also feel like
sunset?
when you have a dad who makes you eat spoiled food, he's
Yeah, I'm
like,
just gonna have a Pop Tart. Oh wait, we probably don't have Pop Tarts
yeah,
yet.
yeah,
Yeah. So she wasn't down there till 9. She tells Bridget she didn't feel very good. She thought that maybe she was getting whatever sickness her, parent, well, not Mrs. Borden and father, I guess we could say, had. So she said she wasn't going to eat anything, which is probably a good choice.
right,
But she said that she was just going to go iron some handkerchiefs. Okay, because that's what we do back then is iron
yeah,
those handkerchiefs. So Bridget said that she also didn't feel well. And so, maybe it's that salmon. I'm not really sure. But after she had done some work, Lizzie told her, just like, go lay down for a little bit, and rest because you're not feeling well. So Bridget says, okay. So she goes to her room, which is on the third floor, um, up in the attic to rest, which I need to see if I can find a picture of like the floor plan of the house because it's a very interesting, unique layout. If you have seen pictures of the house, um, I'll put some pictures
yeah,
in when we post it, but like it's just when we talk about that a little bit more later, you'll see what I mean. So she's clear upstairs. She does that. Andrew had left for work around 9 a.m. too by the time Lizzie came down. So, um, and Uncle John was gone too. So breakfast and all the things are done. Abby, decides she's going to go into this guest room that Uncle John was staying in because she needs to change the bedding since he is gone. So after Bridget wakes up from a very short nap, apparently, I don't know what she really did because that makes it sound like she was laying down for like 5 minutes. I'm like, what was the point of that? But
right,
yeah, so she gets up, and that's when wants her to go wash all of the windows inside and outside. And that kind of sucks because she doesn't feel good. They even said that she was outside like puking. She was washing windows.
oh,
Yeah. So, while she was out there too, she actually chatted with the maid that worked across the fence, like next door. So she was outside that whole time. So she's doing that while Abby's in the guest room changing the linens, and Lizzie's just ironing those handkerchiefs in the dining room. So Lizzie, later says that she never hears anything while she's in there, which is really odd because the guest room is right above the dining room where Lizzie was. Abby weighed over 200 pounds at the time of the murder. So when Abby does fall up there, there's no way Lizzie would not have heard something. I mean, in that house,
Yeah.
they said, especially because it was an old house.
Well, and it's not like you
So,
have AirPods in with some noise
right.
cancellation
Yeah,
going, you
yeah.
know?
Right. And they've actually tested this over the years by dropping different weights of things on that same floor and going to different parts in the house, and they could confirm that they could hear it in every room or like some shaking, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, um, that that kind of is an interesting point there. So this is what's happening for Lizzie right now. We'll get into actual like crimes. Don't worry, I'm getting to that. But so Andrew comes home for lunch at 10:45. Apparently a very
Uh,
early lunch.
yeah.
Um, Bridget later testifies that she had been cleaning the inside of the windows right around the time that he had come home because she heard him struggling to open the front door. So the front door had 3 locks on it, but usually they only locked one ever, so he could just use his key to get in and out. But for whatever reason that day, all 3 were locked. And Bridget had not come in and out through that door. She had gone out through a different door, so she had never even messed with those locks. So, um, she goes and lets him in, and when she's unlocking the doors and letting him in, she can hear Lizzie laughing at the top of the stairs. So, when he's coming in, Lizzie's coming down from the stairs on the second floor, and she's laughing. And we know now that Abby was already dead at this point, in time. Her body was on the floor in the guest room, and the top of the staircase is literally like right next to it. So if Lizzie came down those stairs, it's very hard to believe she would not have seen Abby laying there.
Okay.
Um, Lizzie does admit that she had walked down those stairs, um, and she said she hadn't seen anything, but they, of course, are trying to prove that there's no way she couldn't have. Um, and they also said, well, and wouldn't she have been covered in blood if she had, even went in there
Well,
to see her or freaked out, but there was nothing. So
right. So that's the other hard part. Like, if you, I don't know.
it's really weird. So she comes downstairs after she was heard laughing. Nobody knows anything about Abby yet, but Andrews like asks Lizzie where Abby was. And Bridget said that during the trial, Lizzie had told Andrew that Abby had gotten a note from a sick friend and was off visiting, quote, sick friend. So that's where she wasn't home. And Bridget didn't know any different because she had been outside. So she was like, oh, okay, whatever. So she was visiting this sick friend. Well, we find out later there is no sick friend. There is no note. This never happened. So why did she say this? Probably to cover her ass. So Andrew lays down on the sofa in their living room, and he was just going to take a short nap while he was on his lunch break. Bridget finishes cleaning the windows, goes back up to the 3rd floor to rest because she wasn't feeling good. And we know that Abby's upstairs and she's dead. It's been like,
So when Bridget went up to the attic, was this a separate set of stairs?
yes, there are 2 sets of
Okay.
stairs there, which, yes, that's why I'm like, the layout is very odd.
Because I was like, how would she not have done?
Right. That's kind of what I was like. I'm confused. And there's a lot of back and forth. And this person said this. I mean, the only people that really can testify to anything that happened at this time is Lizzie and Bridget. So,
Yeah.
this kind of their word against each other's here. So we know though that Abby's been dead for at least an hour at this point because of the time that Andrew came home and she hasn't come down. So after Bridget goes upstairs to lay down, she pretty much gets up there, and just a few minutes later, she hears Lizzie scream, "Come down quick. Father is dead. Someone came in and killed him," is what she states. And that is verbatim. I have read that same quote
Yeah.
a million places. That's like the infamous quote. So, that was a very quick thing. Like, how did that happen that fast from the time that Bridget just went upstairs?
Yeah.
But not only that, like, my first thought was, why, if someone came in and killed him, why wouldn't they have killed Lizzie too? Like, in that moment? And why did you not hear screaming or any of the things? But,
Yeah, like,
you
why
know,
didn't Lizzie scream unless she supposedly walked in at the end? But it was
right.
still, like, you would've screamed,
Well, and another thing I
maybe?
didn't know about this case, which I obviously know now, but I don't know why I always assume murders are at night just because it's easier to hide. But like the middle of the freaking morning, like that's crazy to me. And I doubt, I mean, a lot of people don't just break in the middle of the day when there's things because their house was downtown, like near businesses
Right.
and stuff. So that was kind of odd to me. Um,
But if
but
he is a
yeah,
creature of habit and you know that he's gonna be home at that
that's
time,
true.
maybe you know what I mean? It's hard
Yeah.
to say if it was someone who he had
Yeah.
anger.
Yeah, that's true. And they just followed him home kind of and waited. Yeah.
I mean,
So after this, of course, Lizzie, sends Bridget to the doctor's house across the street to get help, which I'm kind of like, at this point, like, dude is dead.
yeah.
We'll talk about the wounds here a little bit more, but he wasn't home. So she goes over to Alice Russell's house, which is Lizzie's friend that we had talked about earlier because she lived nearby. And it was funny because I found out later there was actually a French and an Irish doctor that were literally like just houses down from them, but Lizzie would not
Of
send her
course.
to them because they were
Mhm.
immigrants. So
Mhm.
once again, kind of ironic to talk about that. Um, so like I was just saying, if you've seen any of the pictures of the crime scene, back then, I don't know if that was just like the thing. They just shared it all and it's still out there for you to see. I mean, obviously it's not great quality of pictures, but like if you've seen them, you know that there is no face left on Andrew.
I've
And
never looked at them, but I've heard,
I
like,
mean, it's bad. Like, it literally, like, there's no sign of any facial features. Like, it's clearly was a very personal attack. So it doesn't even look like a face. This is kind of gross, but like, here's your gore for you for spooky season. They just said that his eye was hanging from the socket. That's as
oh,
graphic as I get, but
oh,
I know.
yes.
I know. Sorry, guys, but I just wanted to give you a little visual. I was like,
It was
that's her.
brutal.
Yeah, it was very, very brutal. And I have to not make light of it, but like joke about it a little bit because it's that disturbing that
Oh.
someone could do this. Like,
But, like, that
what?
makes you wonder then too, like, the first hit would have had like, he would have had to have had his eyes closed and been, like, asleep, and the
Yeah.
first hit would have had to have killed him or
So, yeah,
incapacitated him enough for him to not fight back.
yeah. So they said that one strike would have been enough to kill him. And it was, I mean, right in the front of his head. They did confirm that, but they said that he was hit at least 10 to 11 times. So there was a lot of overkill and it
Someone was
was
angry.
very personal. Yes. When cops get there, Bridget and Alice were told by them to go upstairs and get a sheet to cover his body, which first of all, that also shows the times. Why would you ever that's a big no-no. You don't
Yeah.
cover a body with a sheet. You're ruining all the DNA evidence and
Right.
putting more on
Well,
there. It's
yeah,
fine.
yeah. There
So
was none of that then.
yeah, so it's funny because it's like, wow, now you know how things have really changed, which yeah, they wouldn't have been able to do any of that. It's just like so funny to see it's I mean, because we're so used to everything being like CSI and yeah.
Mhm.
But so this is when they go upstairs and Abby is discovered. So Abby is face down on the floor to the left of the guest bed. Um, one hit was to the front of her head, and the rest were the back of her head and neck. Um, yeah, it said that 18 to 19 times she was struck. So I don't know where this
Oh.
40 and 41 came in,
Well,
if it
because it
just
rhymed
rhymes,
better,
but
you
like,
know? Yeah.
yeah. So, um, also they said the way that first hit happened, it was almost like it was on the front of her head, but it was kind of to the side where they think that maybe she had just turned to see like who was there. And that's when it happened. And it was close, like someone was right there in her face. So, um, and again, with the crime scene photo, they do have a picture of her. You can't see nearly as much. You just see her body slumped over. But it was kind of interesting because when I looked at it, it looked like she was like on her knees when she was discovered. But they said that her dress had actually ridden up kind of in the back. So the cop that had found her pulled her top skirt over the back of her shoes to cover her up, like just because he felt like
Yeah.
she needed to be a lady. Like, and I
Yeah.
was like, That's like a respectful thing to do, but once again, like, why would you like even mess with that? But that just shows that they weren't really ready to
Yeah.
take on a case like this. So, I mean, I don't know if anyone's looked at that picture because I could totally see why it looks like she was on her knees, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting little fact that they wanted to make sure she was still feminine. So, um, but it was all those petticoats they had on back then. It made it stuffed up so it looked like she was face down. So, anyways, there's your
Right.
fact for that.
Okay.
Um, originally and I mean, people and police all said that Lizzie was like super calm. She did not cry one time. And of course, back then too, people don't really know how to handle grief.
Shock.
They just
Right.
assume everyone's crying and
Yeah.
screaming and
Like
bawling.
if yeah, if you are the one to discover your father like this and you really didn't have anything to do with it, like your body's gonna go into shock
Oh
and
yeah.
everyone's body handles that a different way.
Oh yeah, totally. And we know that now, and I'm glad that now it's at least recognized a little bit more, somewhat. I mean, more so than it was then. But everybody was really just bothered by how calm she was. So
Well, especially because she's a woman and the
yeah.
1800s where they expect,
Oh yeah.
women are emotional and, all these
hmm
things that,
They're expected to be. Yeah.
yeah.
So the New York Times said on August 6th, the police are acting slowly and carefully in the affair, giving way, no doubt, to feelings of sentiment because of the high social standing of the parties involved. So there was no initial deep dive search into their house until 32 hours after the murders. Um, because of just who they were in society and because they were females, the police
Mhm.
felt it was disrespectful to go look at their stuff, which it's so funny to me how it's such a double standard. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but that's also crazy because so many things could have been ruined or gotten rid of in that time frame. We'll never
Exactly.
know. So Lizzie and Emma weren't even questioned about the murders for like 3 days after that. So during this time, Lizzie changes her story several times. Once she said she was ironing the handkerchiefs after her dad came home. Another time she said she had gone outside to the barn because she was looking to make a weight for fishing line and needed some supplies for that so she could finish that. They said though that she did actually go fish a lot too, so that kind of could check out. But she also said that she was outside looking for stuff to fix the screen. She also said that she was outside picking pears at one point. So, interesting.
Yeah.
And no one saw her doing any of these things that she talked about. So, this doctor across the street actually comes forward and tells police that he had prescribed her a double dose of morphine after the murders had happened because she was having trouble sleeping, obviously.
Mhm.
And he wanted to help her calm down. And so he said that this could have, contributed to her changing stories. And it also could help with how subdued she was, which 2 doses, like, or a double
Mm,
dose of morphine, like,
yeah.
whoa,
Holy
I'm surprised that kid
shit.
wasn't knocked out.
Right, and then you're like, "Okay, did you just have such vivid dreams that then, like, you're still partially
Right.
on it and you're like,
Did I do that? Like,
was
yeah.
that a real thing? Was
Yeah.
this what I was doing?"
I
Like, or
I
you're
know.
mixing your days up, like, shit,
Yes.
not even on anything,
Right.
morphine.
I
I'm like,
know. That's like my daily
"Okay, what's
life.
that?" Yeah.
I'm like, that's just a normal day for me.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, and then they keep coming back to her not crying. They said it was weird she never cried. But, some people just aren't criers, even if you are really sad. Like, and even
Yeah.
being in shock, not being in shock, maybe she never cried before. So don't judge people on that because that's very unfair. I mean, I'm a crier personally. So, like, I would for sure cry. But I know people that wouldn't cry. Like, everyone handles it different.
Yeah.
So that was like a big thing they kept coming back to, which just kind of was a funny thing out of all things. Like, look at the evidence instead of that. But anyway. So, as they're doing their interviews and whatnot around town, they talked to a pharmacist nearby that said a few days before the murders, Lizzie had come in and actually tried to purchase hydrogen cyanide from him.
Oh.
Uh huh. And 3 men that worked there did confirm seeing this. They said she came in and she said she needed it for, I don't even remember. It was something she was like making some kind of something for fishing stuff. I don't know. Like, she had an excuse for why she needed it,
Yeah.
but he was like, nah. So he never gave it to her. So, there's some theories about that maybe she had plans to poison them, and then when she couldn't get it, she had to resort to something else. But we don't really know that either. But
I
she
feel
did
like with
try to
how
buy something, so I
I
don't
mean, but
know.
I also feel like with how much they
Yeah,
just were sick and they eat rotten food, that it would be so easy to poison them
I know.
with anything because how are they gonna know?
Blame it on the food. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, seriously. So there's a lot of weird things there that it's like it could just be circumstantial. Like maybe she really
yeah,
did need it for X, Y, and Z. I don't know.
right.
Um, and I know we had talked about the clothing and how if she had done this, why was she not covered in blood, right? Um, so her friend Alice later had told investigators that after the police, I think, had gone, they were still there, and Lizzie pulled a dress out of the pantry and was like, "Oh my gosh, Alice, this dress is covered in paint. What should I do?" And she started burning it on the stove. And Alice said, "Don't do that. Your parents just got murdered and they don't know who did it. This isn't going to look good." And Lizzie was like, "Oh, whoops," and kept burning it. So I saw it a few different places and I thought, that is odd.
But like that
Why?
also sounds like a made up story. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Because if you're gonna go through the trouble of trying to do this, why would you do it in front of someone?
Yes, exactly. Like she could have done that. And in those 3 days it took before they even talked to
Yeah.
her. But then it's like, it's just really weird to think. Which I'll talk a little bit, like, at the end if we kinda talk about some different theories, which, I mean, it was interesting because that movie, Lizzie, on there, the way they portray that is she was naked when she committed the murder, so she didn't have to, which is
Oh.
actually kind of smart. I was like, "Oh." I mean, back then, obviously, we know, like, DNA now and all the things, but
Yeah.
it showed her, like, sneak up on Abby naked and do it, because then she'd just go
Okay.
rinse off and put on clothes and, like, whatever. But, like, back then, they said that pretty much they had, like, 3 dresses, like a day dress, a
Yeah.
Sunday dress, and, um, yeah. So, we'll talk about that a little bit more too, but as
But
we're
so I guess did she have blood on her after discovering her father?
no,
Then I feel like though that's what's difficult there too because like no time passed from Bridget going upstairs. She wouldn't have had
see, that's
time.
the thing that's, like, weird because they say that other staircase, it would have given her she could have ran up there really quick and threw on a dress, or because she didn't get, like, interviewed, taken anything right away, they said she could have put another dress over the dress she was wearing. There's a lot of different theories, and you could really go down the rabbit hole on that,
Yeah.
but these are all very good points that you're making, that these other ones, like, it's very interesting to kind of think back then how they could have done it, like, and then, of course, there's theories that Bridget was in on this with her, which if that was the case, then obviously we know there would have been a lot of easier
Right.
ways to get around it, but we don't, I
Because
mean,
that's my other thing is like, okay, she ran up these other stairs with how the house is built. Wouldn't Bridget have heard the running?
you would think so, but I don't know. Who knows? I mean, it's very interesting. So, another interesting thing was back then, they often would embalm the bodies in the home.
Oh.
And yeah, so in the house right now, the Lizzie Borden house, they actually have two of these, they call them cooling boards that they bring in, and that's where they do the autopsies. And they have two of those hanging in their home currently now. So if you go visit the Lizzie Borden home, I'm sure it's not the exact ones they used, but I think they're up there just to show what they looked like then.
Still don't like it because that still means that there
I
was
know.
whole dead bodies on there.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Lots of very iffy things that creep me out about that. Um, so they would do that there. And back then, during autopsies, I'm not sure the exact procedure now, but they would remove their stomachs right away and they would test, the toxicology. and they would send these off to the Harvard Med School to be tested. Harvard, woo. So 5 days after the murders was when they had the funeral. So this was another thing that was a little bit odd about Lizzie. So the day of the funeral, her clothing choice. So generally they would wear typical mourning dresses, which, is like the high collar, black, heavy, Victorian style dress. Um, she was not wearing that. So she was wearing this like lacy, like very sexy, form-fitting dress, which I
Sexy
kind of
for the
love.
time
Yeah, yeah. Like I
that
love that for her,
you
but
saw a little bit of,
yeah,
like, her
shoulder to shoulder.
collarbone.
Yeah. Yeah. And she had on a hat. And normally they would also have the veil, which she did not have. So
But if they only have a few dresses, like,
I
who's
don't
got
know. But
it
they had
it's gonna
money, so
I
people
mean,
expected that shit? And so because they were well known, and everybody was
yeah.
watching this case because it was so crazy. The media took note of that and they ran with that too. They mentioned how, for like, I don't know what the general time frame to be in mourning is, but they wanted her for months to be wearing black. They said that generally that is
Well,
what they would do for
yeah,
months, you
well,
know?
and that's just it. I know in, like, I mean, different times and, like, different countries and stuff like that, it's so different, but I feel like there were things, like, in, like, England and stuff like that where, like, that was a thing where it
Yeah.
would be 4 months. 'Cause, like, The Secret Garden, she's in mourning because her parents died, and so
I
she's
remember it
expected to
vaguely.
wear
I watched it, but I don't remember it.
this scene sticks with me, and it's probably because it's my sense of humor, where the maid is asking her what dress she wants to wear. She's like, "Well, do you want the black or black?" You
Yeah.
know? And she's like, "They're all black." I don't
Yeah.
know how to
That's
explain,
funny.
but,
That's,
like,
yeah.
it was
Yeah.
one of those things, like, that everything you
That's
wore,
what
like,
you're
all
supposed
of
to
your
do.
clothes now were black,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
up to some I think I feel like some, and this may just be me and books I've read that are not accurate, but, like, I feel like some were, like it was, like, almost a year. Like, you would have to go,
Yeah.
like, a full year.
Yeah. Because they were talking about that, like, even towards her trial, which we'll talk about, but they wanted her to wear black then. And I was like, that was like a whole year later.
Mhm.
Um, but even during the trial, they talked about how she was wearing bright colors and it was very frowned upon, because she should have been in mourning, but she gave no Fs. So,
Right.
um, another weird fact about this time, and this one was very gross and weird, they had an open casket funeral, even though they were butchered.
Oh,
Which,
dear
yeah,
God.
so how they got away with doing that was they were on their sides and they had their heads turned, so the sides that weren't as bad were the ones showing. Is that not freaking traumatizing and
Dear
just I
God,
know, I know.
why?
I was the more I was looking at this case, I was like, "This is real ick." Like, this got real weird. It's
I
like,
feel
I'm
like at
sure they're
that point
haunting
it's
the
just
shit out of that place, like
right, I feel like at that point it was just people being nosy who wanted to
yes.
goth and
Oh, yes.
see.
Like, it's just like, that seems just disrespectful even, you know what I mean? Like, come on,
Yeah.
let him rest in peace, like, but we're not even done with that whole thing yet, because that just gets weird, but yeah. So, after that the funeral, they are brought to a holding tomb near the front of the cemetery instead of being buried, and they do another autopsy in the ladies' comfort station is what it was called, and then they do another one later on. I don't know why they do so many and why you wouldn't just do it all at once, but
Right.
the reason I think they did the funeral and then did this other part of the autopsy was because they removed their heads because they wanted to keep the heads for trial evidence. So they were boiled down so they could see the skull. So there was nothing left but the skull, and you could see the wounds that were put into them. Like, it just
If
sounds
that house
absolutely
isn't
terrible.
haunted
Uh
by
huh.
Andrew and Abby
Girl, I
after
know.
it's
I
not at
know.
this point, I feel like the police and the other people have done worse. They died instantly probably with the first hit.
Yeah.
Like, yes, it
Let's
was
just stop.
brutal, but at least it was quick, I
Yeah.
guess.
And it
Um,
said that, like, Lizzie and her sister didn't even know that they were doing this, and then, like, was shocked when they, like, at the trial, it's like, "Oh,
just
and by the
pull
way,
out your
here's your dad's head." What?
his shattered skull.
Yeah. Isn't that sick?
What the
Like,
fuck?
and who has that job? Like, who wants that job? Not I.
Oh God. It just reminds me of there's that case, I want to say it was in Australia, with the woman who murdered like her husband and fed him, or
I
their kids or something, and like boiled his head, and his head was on a
yes,
pot, and I'm
yes,
just like,
yep. There's a show.
oh,
There's that what's it called? Grotesque or something. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's the new
oh, is it the one
Ryan
you're?
Murphy FX. It's
Oh,
very,
so
very
I
just graphic and gory and
oh,
vile.
okay. I was looking at it and I thought it was gonna be more like, I guess the way it looked, I thought it was gonna be more like
Oh
supernaturally
God, no,
gore.
no, no,
Oh,
no.
okay. Well, then I'm glad I'm
Uh-uh.
not.
Yeah, I
Um,
have watched the first few, and I don't know if I'm gonna finish it. It's like that bad, and I can handle
yeah.
a lot. It's pretty bad, but there's a scene in there where a person is boiled, and I don't want to go into any more detail than that because
No.
it's horrific. But yeah,
Yeah.
so
At that point you're desecrating these people's
I
bodies.
know it's just gross, and like I think we kind of know maybe what happened already. So
Yeah,
like,
why do we need to, like, if you have photos,
right?
I think that's
Those
enough.
the photo and the one of him, I'm like, wow, that's just like all over the place for people to see. So like that alone, and then the open casket. But okay, enough. That's just a lot.
I feel
So
like it's illegal also
yeah.
to take apart a person's body without letting their family know.
Also, yes, I'm gonna go with that. Yep, yep, yep.
So many, okay.
So August 11th, the New York Times posts. Oh gosh, you can tell I'm working on this. Yeah, they come out with whatever their new the paper at the time.
Mhm.
The headline said Lizzie Borden is under arrest, charged with murdering her father and stepmother last Thursday morning in their home on 2nd Street. She was brought into the 2nd District courtroom about 3 o'clock this afternoon, presumably to give further evidence at the inquest. Miss Borden was accompanied by her sister and Mrs. Brigham. I don't know who that is. As was the case yesterday, all of the proceedings carried on behind locked doors. So, um, kind of what led to her arrest. So there were 5 days of inquest, which this was when it was like trial, but not. So like she had
Yeah.
to take the stand, every single day. Um, and she didn't actually take the stand during her actual trial very much at all, but she still had to be there. So the main thing that no one could really account for was where she was during the murder. So none of her answers matched to what Bridget said. Bridget's were very detailed, very concise and consistent the whole way through. And Lizzie couldn't even keep up with what she was telling. They would ask her a question, and a few minutes later, they would kind of redirect the same question, and she would say something completely different. So that morphine, I don't
I was gonna
know.
say, I mean, if she's still on drugs or something though, too, that's so.
Right. So, like, they had taken her in too, I think, at this point, because they're kind of like, okay, like, there's really no one else, like, that could have done this. And so we're going to go through this and see what we figure out. And we're going to go from there because there were a couple other, like, theories, which I didn't want to add because this is already so long. But, like, they had arrested a random immigrant that they thought maybe was connected and wasn't. And, like, I'm sure there were some other people here and there, but ultimately, like, she was really the main suspect. But they did also interview Uncle John, of course, because he had been there. He had a very detailed recollection of his day. He said how he didn't eat breakfast with them, but he had went to visit relatives from 9 to noon that day. He even remembered the train conductor's number on his. He remembered the carriage number and the names of 6 different priests he had talked to that day.
Why did he talk to six priests that day?
Hell if I know. I wouldn't know. 6 too many. But
Yeah.
very interesting. Like, why? Like, it was very detailed to the point of, like, you're kind of like, that's a little weird, right?
Yeah.
But nothing was ever, like, tied to him. So they never went that route because they literally couldn't tie anything to him.
But it also makes me wonder, again, with the times, here's an affluent man
Hmm.
versus a spinster
Right.
woman.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was interesting. So they just kind of brushed that off and they're like, well, that just kind of like leaves her. So the judge straight up just said, yeah, she's probably guilty. It's like, okay. So this is when they actually arrest her. So then she gets sent to jail and she spent 9 months in a tiny little cell. So Talk about going from a nice big house minus the electricity, no
Right.
electricity and
I
water.
mean, there she probably had indoor plumbing.
Yeah, so maybe she's living her best life there. I mean, probably not, because prisons were a lot different back then than they are now, or jail. She was in jail, so
Right.
different
Well,
than prison,
and
but
as a woman, again,
yeah,
too. I mean, there's still, but like
yeah. But money
all the things.
talks too,
I
so,
mean, that
like, you
could
never know.
be,
Who
yeah, it's hard to
knows?
say.
But, that was quite the change for her because she went from having a servant to being in jail. So, they said even when they arrested her, she was just super chill. Like, okay, they offered to read her the arrest warrant, and she was like, "No, I'm good." Like, didn't care. Was like, literally just I kind of like just love how much she doesn't care. You know what I mean? She's kind of just a badass in the sense of like, "Yeah, I did what I
R-
did. I'm not gonna say I did it, but
Right. I mean, there's so many, I don't know. I have so many thoughts on that. So, well, one,
yeah."
is she still on morphine? Because, like,
I
who's
know.
going to give a
That was
fuck
the
about
only
anything on
mention.
morphine?
Right. That was the
Um,
only mention of it, and so I have no idea if there was more tied to it later on or not.
yeah.
But, I mean, I didn't know you could just give that out as, like, I
I mean,
mean,
at that point, that's, I mean, there was cocaine as
yeah, there
medical,
were other options. Yeah, yes.
but
So who
you know what I
knows?
mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, at that time they're like, oh, you can't sleep, here's some morphine.
Yeah.
You
Dope
know, oh,
yourself up.
you got a headache, here's some morphine. You know what I mean? Like, the
100%.
times were definitely different at that. But so it's like, okay, how much was that? How much is just recognizing your position in society as a woman and being like, you know
Correct.
what, you're not going to listen to me anyway, so like, fuck it, whatever. I'm not going to give
Yeah.
you guys what you want.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where she was at. She was just like, whatever, this is just entertaining at this point now to see what they're going to do. What are they going to do next? So,
Yeah.
after she's arrested too, her family members started talking, and like some of them thought that Lizzie and Uncle John had done it together. Um, there were other protests that were like the other way. You know, she had been so involved in things that like a lot of these groups that she had been a part of, they really backed her up, which was kind of cool. I mean, thankfully, at least it wasn't for nothing, I guess you could say
Yeah.
there. But
Well, I mean, yeah.
yeah, so they backed her up and they were like, there's no way. So they also like fought for her and saying like she's not gonna get a fair trial. There's no way. Because at that time, as we know, women could not be on the jury because only the people that could be and serve on the jury were those who had voting rights. And we know that women still couldn't vote at that time.
It was only white
So
men.
yeah. So it would be a jury of men. And it's kind of funny, actually, because once again, in the Lizzie Borden house now, if you go visit there, you will find a picture of the jury framed there that they had given as a gift to Lizzie after the trial. Like these dudes got together, went somewhere, got their picture taken and gave it as a gift. Just a bunch of old white dudes. So um, yeah, and it was interesting though because they were made up of a lot of like blue collar guys and farmers and stuff because they had to pull from a jury pool elsewhere because
Yeah.
obviously the Falls City was
Yeah.
very biased at that point. So, they even had to have the trial in New Bedford. So the trial starts in June of 1893. Um the trial itself, like, totally give me, like, OJ vibes, just, like, either he did it or, she did or didn't and all
Yeah.
the things, and it was, like, either you thought that or you thought she didn't, and there was really no in between.
Yeah.
Um, Defense was using the excuse that there was really not a murder weapon because they never found any sort of actual weapon, so they couldn't tie anything to her, um, and there was nothing that had blood on them that they could tie to her. And we know that they couldn't, there's no luminol and like tests like
Right.
that. So she literally could have used this hatchet, wiped it off, put it away, and they would never have any way of knowing that blood was just seeped into that thing.
Yeah.
Um, but it's interesting because defense also used the excuse that a woman couldn't have possibly done something like this to parents with a hatchet. That's man shit, kind of was like,
Right.
and they were like, women use poison, which, okay, maybe she tried to do that. We don't know.
Right. Yeah.
But that was like their thing was like, a woman could never do this. So, okay. Um, but then Alice Russell was kind of like their bombshell testimony because, remember she was Lizzie's good friend, but she
Mhm.
was also the one that Bridget went and got after the murder. So she was there when they found Abby. She was there when Lizzie burned this paint covered dress. Um, Alice had originally testified at the inquest, but at that time, she didn't tell them about the dress. They had asked her if all of the dresses had been accounted for after the murder, and she said yes. But after her guilt got the best of her, and I don't know how much longer this was, but she eventually asked to talk to the jury again because she needed to tell them. So then that went down. So she was indicted the next day. The district attorney, Jose and Knowlton, um, kind of sounds just like a badass. Everything I saw about him, like, he knew that Lizzie did this and he wanted her to go down. He fought hardcore. He just kind of looked like one of those mob guys. Like, the picture I saw, I was like, he looks like a good time. But um, he, pointed out every little thing to prove that she had done it. So the medical examiner said that Abby had died between 9 and 10:30 a.m. When Jose asked where she was during this time, she said she was ironing handkerchiefs. So he asked her what time, and she said she didn't know. He asked her where she was when Andrew returned, and she said that she was reading an old magazine in the kitchen. So this doesn't add up with what Bridget said, because Bridget was trying to help the door open up the door when she heard her laughing from upstairs. So she wasn't in the kitchen. And if they're upstairs, they're right by the front door, and the kitchen is across the way. So this places her upstairs where Abby was murdered. So they tell Lizzie, like, that's BS. They said, "Are you sure you were in the kitchen?" She's like, "Well, I don't know if I was in the kitchen. It might have been the dining room." He asked her if she went back up to her room before her father returned, which would have been a good opportunity for her to clean up her dress had she been wearing one. And he was really trying to get her to slip up. He was asking questions like the same things, but different ways. She said, "Oh, wait, actually, I think I did go upstairs because I had to carry the laundry up there." He said, "Okay, so you were up there." And she said, "Yeah." He said, "So you were upstairs when Andrew came home?" And she said, "No, sir." So then he asked a bunch of other questions, and he circled back and asked her where she was when Andrew came home. She said, "I think my room upstairs." So, like, she just wasn't a credible witness.
Yeah.
And she was answering different every time. And he just couldn't get her to commit to something. So, like, it has guilt written all over it because, like, if you really didn't, but then it's like, well, was she on morphine then? Or it's just weird. So,
Also, it's like the time of Abby's death, like how accurate at that time frame, could they really narrow down that stuff?
right. Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, like, he just, like, played it hardcore. Um, but, the next day at trial, like, she was weird about it again. She didn't know where Bridget was or where she herself was. She's saying she went to the barn. And another thing was when she said that she had gone in there to get supplies for her fishing thing. When they went and looked in there were no, like, nothing in the dirt. It's like up in the barn. So, like, she would have had to go up a thing, and, like, it was all dusty and old. Like, nothing has been up
oh,
there in
no one had
ages
been
type
up there.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, another thing was the police said that there was a bucket of bloody rags when they had arrived at the house. And they asked her what that was. What do you think she said? She said she was menstruating. And I think then and now, whenever you say that to a man, you immediately get, okay, done. Don't want to
Mm-hmm.
hear any more about it. And it was
Yep.
like that then too. And so they literally didn't test them because they just believed her. Like, a lot of things, it's like there was a lot of mistakes there. Which, how
Yeah.
could they have really tested them? I don't know if they could have done
I
some kind
don't
of
know
blood
if
test, maybe. I
I
don't know.
don't at that in
I
1800s.
know. I don't
I don't
know.
know
So,
that
it
there
might
would
have not
have.
mattered anyway, but, like, why would you still not take something, like, just to
I
keep on
mean,
hand? I don't know. Because then you think, like, down the road now with all the things we have, like, if they could test them, if they had saved something, but I don't know how long that stuff stays. So,
that's yeah.
but yeah. So Lizzie, though, was really good at reading the room. She knew when she needed to act clueless, and to play the part, because she would go into her trial with, like, a fan and, like, the little
Yeah.
fans, and she would have flowers because everyone just carries flowers around, I guess. She just would go in and act like a real lady. She was just feminine and what they wanted to see. So the newspaper there even described her as quiet, modest, and well bred. Well, that's a term you don't hear. Yep. Another said that she had lacked Amazonian? Yeah, that's how you say this, right?
Yeah.
Amazonian proportions, meaning not tall. That's a way to put it, right?
Well,
Um,
also, it kind of sounds like they're like, well, there's no way with her frame and size that she could have done this, you know?
right.
Like,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
assume that you'd have to be an Amazon woman
Oh, yeah.
to murder with
Yeah,
an axe.
totally. So, closing arguments. Jose's lasted 5 hours,
Oh,
which is a
God.
lot.
At
I'm
that
like,
point, I'm
yes.
sorry. As a
Like, that's a whole
juror,
thing
I'd be
again.
like,
Yeah.
I'm already against you. You made me sit in this
Yeah.
courtroom in July where there's
Yeah.
no air
No air
conditioning,
conditioning.
and they're
Correct.
probably in their best suits
Yes.
for 5 hours just to listen to you spew on. At this point,
Yeah. It's
I'm
it's
gonna
something.
say I'm gonna say she's innocent just to spite you because you've pissed me off.
Right. Right. Totally. So, um, yeah, that was 5 hours of that. Like, no thanks. But he just pointed out the things again, the main points of being that it was weird that both of the times that Bridget had left Lizzie alone, one of her parents died. Like, he has a good point. He pointed out it was a bit ironic that Lizzie said she was in the barn because if she had been in the barn at that time, then that's really the only place on the property where she wouldn't have been able to see anyone coming in and out of their home. So she wouldn't have had to lie. Um, Also mentioned that the note that Lizzie said that came for Abby to go visit this friend was never seen. There was no messenger that confirmed dropping it off. There was no sick friend. No one was coming forward with this info. So, like, if that was the case, why wouldn't they give that credibility there?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Um, they said, if it was a stranger, like the way the house was set up was so unique that it would have had to have been someone who was familiar with the layout, or they would have been looking all over to find ways in and out and to do what they needed to do because, like, that just seems like a far stretch, but it still could be. You never know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so the jury, like we mentioned, white, older men, but a lot of them had daughters Lizzie's age, which actually helped her out because the jury decided um after only 90 minutes not guilty. And I even saw that it said they actually decided after 30 minutes, but they felt like they needed to sit there longer. So yeah. So this was, announced, and Lizzie fell down to her knees and sobbed. But then, they did talk about it was really ironic the order that they were killed because it actually really benefited her because, they were like, well, if this was about money and whatnot, like, or why was Abby even killed at all? And why, if it wasn't Lizzie, why would Abby have been killed? It doesn't make any sense. So if Abby was killed first, all of her stuff would be transferred to Andrew. Then once Andrew's killed, then all of Abby's stuff and all of his stuff goes to Emma and Lizzie. So had it been the opposite, his stuff would have gone to Abby. Abby dies, her stuff goes to her family.
Oh.
So that's what they made a point of saying that because of her dying first, they said that worked out well. And they said, if a stranger was, there's no point. Like, what was the motive if a stranger did this? It doesn't make sense. Not for money anyway.
Yeah.
Um, because Abby had two sisters, Birdie and Priscilla. And I will point out that Emma and Lizzie did both give money to them from Abby's estate. So, like, I don't know how much. I don't think a ton, but like at least they did that much because
Yeah.
that would have been real shitty. Um, they inherited $500,000 back then, which is equal to $10 million today.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. September of 1893, Lizzie and Emma moved into a house together up on the hills
I do
where she
remember that. Like
always wanted to go.
when you mentioned the hill, I was like, I feel like
Yes.
she ended up there.
Yep. And they had this big fancy mansion, always what Lizzie wanted. She ended up naming the home Maplecroft, which just sounds very
I
established and
mean,
fancy. I want to
listen,
have,
if I had a giant home, I would give it a name too.
yeah, oh, for sure. Um, so yeah, that was, the fancy area. And so they lived up there. She was throwing parties left and right. She was partying with theater people, which apparently Emma did not like that. So they ended up having a falling out over this. just because of Liz. Oh my gosh, this is what happens when you
Lizzie's.
record late at night.
I know.
Ugh. It's not even late. I'm just old.
I mean,
But yeah, so Lizzie just they never like got along at that point. So she moves out, Emma, in 1905, and they never spoke again,
I feel like I remember hearing that too. I
which
also
is
feel
sad.
I know. I'm like, I don't know. Feels like a thing that though, like, I don't know if Lizzie had done it at that point. I don't know if double jeopardy was a
Oh,
thing and that like if her
it
sister
said
was
no
pissed.
because they said they wouldn't
No.
try it again with her because that's what was said that I read, which I mean, I don't know that they called it double jeopardy then, but
Right.
I don't know. And maybe that was something, a different law, who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, she still was getting into a little bit of trouble because I don't know if I mentioned, I don't think I did earlier, way before all of this happened, she would get in trouble a little bit for shoplifting, which is funny because they had a lot of money, but I think it was just more of like, just because
Well,
that's
because
just,
you're bored and you want
yeah,
to see what you can
totally.
get away with
Yep.
because you have money and you know you're not really gonna probably get in trouble.
Yeah. So, she actually got caught shoplifting again 4 years after her acquittal. She had to pay restitution on that, so kind of funny, but
I'm sure she had the money for it.
yeah, totally. So, I mean, overall, Lizzie loved her life. She ended up owning the first vehicle in the neighborhood at that time.
Nice.
She even had her own gas pump there, which I guess is still there at that house, which is badass.
Oh,
Yeah. She loved traveling. She even hired a traveling buddy. See, this is when you said maybe she had a roommate. Maybe
yeah.
this is what it was. She had a traveling buddy that she hired, and her name was Trudy. And she lived with her briefly and traveled with her. So,
Mm-hmm.
she did continue all of her charity work, and it was mostly anonymously, So, I mean, understandable because she said, they say, whatever, that, even though she was acquitted, most people still believed that she had done it. So she would get stared at a lot. People would whisper about her. She was shunned by her church. The people there, all the people that had backed her up were like, okay, but bye, so
Which is so
they,
crazy to me to be like, no, we're gonna be like, yeah, there's no way she did this, but then they're gonna be like, just kidding. Now that you're free, we're
right,
not.
exactly, exactly. Um, so yeah, kids were also kind of little assholes. Kids would go to her house in the hills and scream that nursery rhyme like, at the house. They would also put little pins in her doorbell so that it would ring like nonstop. And she would have to come down and take the pins out of the door or the doorbell to
Yeah,
get it to stop. I'm like, do you not know what she was like accused of doing?
right.
I
Like
would hack your
it.
face off too if you did that
What?
to mine.
Well, it's amazing to me that people think that she did this, but they're like, yeah, we
And
think
they're,
you totally
yeah.
murdered them, so we're gonna antagonize you.
I'm like, well, you kind of deserve what's coming to you then. Just saying. Dude, I will hack a face off if someone does that shit to me. So,
I just,
yeah. But
yeah.
she, anyway, after all that she went through, she actually died at 66 from pneumonia. And in 1927, Emma, her sister, died 9 days after her, actually, which is ironic because they
Oh,
were like 9 years
9 years
apart.
apart. Yeah.
So she died in New Hampshire, but yeah, a little bit on that. And Lizzie loved animals. And at the home now, when you go visit, there's actually a picture of her there too. Which I found this picture, I'll post it, of her at her home at Maplecroft, and she's like sitting out on the porch holding her dog, a little Boston Terrier.
Oh,
But it's like funny because she's like old and like just here she is holding this dog. It's like, okay, this lady potentially like
yeah. I'm so
hacked her
torn
parents'
on
face off.
I'm torn on whether or not I think she did it. Like, I understand, like, the circumstantial evidence, but I'm also like, but the times and, like,
I
did they
know.
look hard? Like, there's so much.
Yeah, I know. It's tough. Like, I don't know. But I mean, I'm not mad at her even if she did now because she left $30,000 to the Fall River Animal Rescue. So I'm like,
Oh,
I'm all about that. So,
yeah.
um, but on Bridget's deathbed, she actually told her sister that she had lied on the stand to protect Lizzie. She didn't say what she lied about or why she lied. But she said she couldn't die with having that on her chest. So I don't know.
Oh.
And after the murders and after the trial and all that, Bridget left and never really spoke about it again to anybody. So I don't really know about that. But I do know a bunch of years after the murders, a hatchet was found on one of the neighbors' roofs. it was found because some kids were like playing with their ball and it got stuck up on the roof. And so they went to get it and they found this hatchet. It was all rusted, but under the rust, they could tell that this had been a brand new um, hatchet, which is important because if you look at Abby's wounds, they found, I think they call it gilt. So gilt, that's from a new hatchet. So
Oh,
if you see the wounds on Abby, there were pieces of this gilt in her skull. So they're wondering if maybe after this murder, she just threw it up on someone's roof and it was never discovered. Kind of a little interesting piece.
weird.
So anyways, I guess the moral of this story is don't kill your parents.
I mean,
I mean,
yeah,
there's more morals, but
I
that's what
mean,
I'm taking away from it.
there's so much to this one. Like I said, so many unanswered things. It's so many circumstantial things. I feel like a lot of people did a lot of lying in here, and I feel like if Lizzie did I don't feel like it was her alone.
I know, and that's how they show it on the movie, and they show it as her and Bridget doing it together. But they also show some scenes of Andrew possibly assaulting Bridget. So I don't know if that played a part in any of that, but and I don't know if that's, once again, if that there's any truth to that at all anyway. But
Right.
I mean, it would make sense for a motive in that sense. But like, I don't know, was she just pissed at them because I don't know. Like, what was the motive? Did she just finally snap one day?
I feel like there's so much that we don't know about this. Like,
Yeah.
if she did do it, I feel like money doesn't feel like it would have been the motive there because she was already donating her time and her money to charities
Right.
prior.
She didn't need it. So, no.
So that doesn't feel quite right either. I don't know. I feel
I
like there's
know.
stuff missing there, and I know that there are the whole rabbit holes that you can go into there
Oh,
with
yeah.
that, but it is still a very interesting case, and it is one that, like, when you're younger and you first hear about it, it sounds like, oh yeah, no, she did it. And I always thought it was at night too because I thought they were both in
Yeah.
bed.
I know. I think I'm thinking of Velisca just because
Right.
I mean, and we generally things happen at night because it's easier.
Yeah.
No one's watching. But
Yeah.
I mean, you can go visit the house too. Someone I used to work with, I'll tell you about her later, Cassie, because she obviously doesn't work there anymore, but with us that used to work
Mm-hmm.
there had gone to it because I remember when she was telling me about it. But you could go do tours. You can also rent rooms. You can rent the whole place. Um, there are rumors that there's a paranormal aspect of them haunting the place. Um, of course, that's a whole nother avenue we could go down.
Yeah.
But their website, which we will put in the show notes in here, it just tells you all the things you can go do. And of course there's like a shop on there. You can buy the stuff you can buy on there. You can buy a little axe that has blood
Oh
on it. Like
God.
you can buy like a haunted doll, you can buy a board game. It's a little bit of everything. But there is like history on there and stuff. And they talk about the hauntings and stuff, and like you can just do a day tour, but you can stay the night and stuff. And I know lots of different podcasts, people have gone and stayed and stuff. And it, is the original house. They haven't changed too much of it other than, I mean,
Adding electricity.
obviously, yeah. And I mean, like, you can go sit in the same spot where Andrew was butchered.
No, thank you.
Like, yeah, I know. There's people like on there when you look at their website, there's like pictures of people like laying in the same position.
No,
Like, okay,
no,
that's
that's
taking
not
it a bit
okay.
far. Oh, it's really gross. I'm like,
Ew.
ew.
That's
Like,
like, I don't know.
I
That's like,
think I wouldn't make a trip just for that, but like if I was up there anyway, I would totally go like
I
take a
would
tour,
I
but
would take a tour
I
and
wouldn't be
like
doing pictures like that. But
no, because I mean, like, I want to go to the Velisca house, and that's near us,
yes,
right? And I want to
that one
I
I
want
would
to
do.
stay overnight and everything like that. But like, I'm also not gonna lay in the beds that it had
Right.
it. Like,
Correct. I know.
I
I
don't
had
think.
listened to
I
a
mean, yeah.
podcast where they actually had um they were staying there and recording the episode, and it was kind of annoying just because it kept stopping saying, "Oh my gosh, did you hear that? Oh my gosh, what was that?" Like that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I'm like, I'm sure it was creepy as hell, but, like, I was like, you're not finding me doing that." And they're like, "Yeah, we feel weird even doing this because, like, you don't wanna talk bad about the dead in the place they got murdered, and, like, you just don't know." And so
Mhm.
they're like, "This is weird." It's like, "Yeah, I don't think I'd be, like, making jokes and stuff, like, was in that house."
Oh,
But
no.
that is a very interesting case, and so, you'll have to listen to our next bonus episode because there's some other fun stuff, and if you're interested in this case, let us know, and if you know other thoughts or theories and all the things, we would love to hear those.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's it, and, yeah, definitely check out our bonus, episode because this is how it all tied in, to Nebraska. We have some local stuff that's happening with that kind of ties into this case, um,
And it's fun
and
for this time of year, like, if you're into this kinda thing, then you'll wanna listen to that because
yeah,
it's yeah.
so go check that one out right after this one.
I'm sorry this was a long episode, it was a lot of information, and I felt so organized when I did it and typed it up, and then I just feel like I just rambled on for an hour and a half. So,
No,
thanks for
it's fine.
sticking with
There
us.
is a lot to it, and I'm sure the thing is, like you said before, this could have been so much
Oh,
longer
yeah.
if you went down every single little rabbit hole that there
Right,
could
and, like,
be.
some of that you have to tie in at the time where you're like, "Okay, this happened then, but later this happens," because it's like, otherwise, yeah, you go down this whole other road of, like I mean, this would have been a very long episode, so hopefully
Yeah,
you were able to follow along without my I'm not
you
on
know,
my Adderall right now, so I'm probably just really not with it, but
that's fine. So yeah, well, thank you, Shannon, for covering that,
thank
and
you.
listen to our bonus episode. And yeah, you guys, you know what to do at this point. Like, rate, review, share, follow, do all that fun stuff. All of our stuff is in the show notes. All of our socials are in the show notes there. And until next time, stay Heartland kind.
But Darkland wary.